In this episode of Real Life Angel Encounters, an angelic healing and a bottle of Dr. Pepper, as told through poetry. Angels. We all have them. They're our unseen guides, our companions, our teachers, and they're all around us. Sometimes they make themselves known in the most miraculous ways. Join me, Level 3 QHHT practitioner, angel communicator, and Reiki master, Christy Clemens Hoffman, with stories from real people who have experienced uplifting phenomena and real-life angel encounters. Hello, friends. Before we get too much further, I have a couple of important announcements. First of all, Real Life Angel Encounters, the podcast you're listening to right now, is going to soon be a book. Yes, Real Life Angel Encounters, real people share real stories of miraculous encounters from O Books, midsummer. In the UK, June 24th, and in the US, July 1st. But you don't have to wait for the release date to order your copy. There's a link in the show notes for pre-orders. Why pre-order? Well, first of all, you'll get your copy as soon as it's available to the public, delivered right to your mailbox. But also, pre-orders really boost the numbers in the algorithms on Amazon mostly. And the more pre-orders that we get, the more likely the book is to sell once it's released. So those pre-orders really do add up. All right. Next, the story that you're about to hear soon is, I just wanted to give you a bit of a trigger warning because it deals with a theme of suicide. So here's your trigger warning. If you need to skip forward, then I would recommend doing that. But if you'd like to stick around, it's a beautiful, beautiful story told very well by a dear friend. And now we have my friend, James W.A., to talk about a couple of his stories, which were really very engaging. Welcome, James. Thank you so much for joining me
Hello.
today.
Hey, thanks. It's awesome to be here.
So you have a story that's kind of a delicate nature, a personal story from a few years ago. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main story, a good number of years ago, and I kind of chronicle all this in a poem. Actually, I'm a poet and writer as
Yeah,
well.
okay, full disclaimer, James and I know each other from the poet scene in Kansas City. James is an excellent poet. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. No, about the curtain there. No, thank you. Appreciate that. So, quite a number of years ago, at this point, actually quite a while ago at this point. Now I'm thinking about it. I was in not so good of a place in my life, and so I was kind of hitting the low point, as it were. So I got off work one night, and I figured that was the night I was going to kill myself. I figured this that where we've kind of reached the end of the line there. So, however, I did have it in my mind because this is how I work, I suppose. The one thing I wanted to do beforehand was drink Dr. Pepper one more time. I love Dr. Pepper. That's kind of my thing. So I wanted a bottle of Dr. Pepper. And that's why the poem that this is about is called A Bottle of Dr. Pepper. It's kind of meta joke there, I suppose. So my way home from work, I stopped into a Walmart. There was one down the street. I walked in, grabbed it, left, walking back to my car, obviously very upset and grumpily. And then I heard a voice call out to me, and it was just this very friendly, like, "Hey man, how's it going?" And normally I try to be very friendly to people. I try to be very like whatever, but I just kind of turn around. I'm like, "Not good, dude." Like, kind of like, "What do you want?" And it was a man sitting. He was in like an SUV, and he had his trunk open, and he was sitting in the back there, and he was like, "Oh, come over, chat for a sec." And I'm just kind of like, "Well, whatever. I guess I got nothing better to do." Like, I don't. I'm like, "Well, whatever. I'll give the last of my money. Maybe he's like a bum or something. I'll give him the last of my money. Whatever. I don't need it." So I go over, and this guy he's so happy. He is just radiating joy. And he's like, "Are you doing all right?" I'm like, "No, not really, dude. Like, just there's a lot going on." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah. What's troubling you?" I'm like, "It's a long story." He's like, "Yeah, man, I feel that." And then he starts telling, in most situations, this would probably not be good, but it really hit me. He started telling me, like, kind of like how he didn't exclusively state, like, "I'm so happy." He was like, "Yeah, I know I have had some rough times, but like, I'm doing a lot better, me and my wife." And he kind of like points into the car, and there's a woman sitting back there, and I never actually got her name. He did introduce himself. He introduced himself solely as Tommy, no last name. And he was just telling me about how his wife, they were just kind of making by. They were living in this car, but he was so happy. He just got a job, but like they're in love with each other. That's all they want. That's all they need. All they need is love. Like it sounds kind of cliche, but it kind of really hit me hard in the moment,
Oh,
especially because a lot of my angst was due to a really bad breakup of mine. So that was kind of a pressure point, as it were. It kind of got me into my head that if this guy who didn't really have a whole lot could kind of not just find love, but that be his anchor, kind of be a source of joy. Like this guy should be way more upset than I was. If he could be that joyful, man, that would have been that always moved me. It moved me enough to not obviously still be here today. So kind of
made a huge
um
impression on you.
huge
Right.
impression. And just his general demeanor. It was hard to explain because it was very calm but joyful. It wasn't like, woo, happy party kind of guy. It was just this very calm, well, life is good. Like, we're making it work and we have each other and we're in this together. And like, it just very, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. That's probably calm but joyful. It's
Right.
probably the best word I have for it.
And just so random. I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about, these kind of random things. Somebody
Yeah.
in the parking lot just comes out of the blue at the right time. When
And called out to me specifically and never asked me for anything. I was kind of expecting for like the, okay, why did you call me over kind of thing. I was kind of expecting to be like, yeah, man, we're making it by, but I could use an extra buck, like something like that. Like I was waiting kind of, and maybe that's just my negativity at the time. But I was kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop kind of thing, or to the like, why would you call out to a random stranger to me, kind of thing. Never saw the guy again. I offered afterwards. I'm like, I kind of told him like, thanks, man. That what you said meant a lot to me. If you ever want to swing by, I was working at Chick-fil-A at the time. I'm like, if you ever want to swing in, man, it's a free sandwich on me. And he's like, thank you, I appreciate that. But it was always very calm. It wasn't like, oh, thanks, man. Like, oh, I need some free food now. It was, I don't want to say authoritative, but it was very like, I appreciate that. Like, I knew he wasn't going to, but there's something there.
it was a
How to
gesture.
describe it?
Oh.
Yeah.
It reminds me so much of a story from a couple of years ago on this podcast. I called it The Pizza Man. It's in my book too, Real Life Angel
Oh,
Encounters. And this woman was at the same point in her life. Things were not working. She was not okay. And she was at college and sitting outside of the dorms. And this pizza guy comes up with a bunch of pizzas. He rings in to go inside and call the people to come down and get their pizza. He comes out and he gets about 20 feet away from her, 20, 30 feet. He turns around and he goes, God hears you, everything's going to be
yeah.
okay. That's exactly what she
Oh,
needed at the time.
yeah. It's exactly what you needed to hear.
Isn't it amazing if these things can happen?
That's awesome, and that's why I think this Tommy. I don't know if he was an angel. He could just been some really nice person. But in that moment, I'm like, what are the odds that he said something? He was saying all the right things and called out to me specifically. I felt like he was there for a purpose, and that purpose was to at least get me home. Made it home, obviously, and obviously here I am today. So I'm stuck. Well, my life wasn't perfect after that. Obviously, it wasn't like that turned my life around, but it got me through it, and that's really what counts.
That's the big thing. He doesn't necessarily need to be an angel. I mean, he could have been at the right place at the right time, encouraged
Never
by
know.
some sort of unseen divine force to be there at the right
Of
time
course, of course.
and see you in your despair and
Yeah,
know that you needed a kind word,
yeah.
just needed someone to care and give a crap.
And that's exactly what I needed. And yeah,
Yeah.
either God or an angel, someone was looking out for me that night.
Yeah. Let's hear the poem about it. And then you've got another.
Oh yeah,
Let's hear your poem.
yeah. I'll absolutely read it. Find it in the book, which I do have here. A shameless promotion. Oh
Oh,
gosh, it's not showing up well
hold it right in front of you.
on the
There
thing.
you
Are we working
go.
there? Oh, there we go.
Desolation
Yeah,
and
that's my book.
epiphany.
Desolation and Epiphany. So it's obviously in the Epiphany section of the book. So I suppose we'll put some links in the descriptions, or
We will
you know
put links in the show
whatever we do.
notes.
Whatever we do there. Yeah, go ahead and read the poem. I'm sure life there. So the poem is called A Bottle of Dr. Pepper. I was almost killed one night by what my ex girlfriend described as a miserable loser with no future, but was really just a defeated man. On the night I almost took my life by driving off a bridge at full speed, there was only one thing I wanted, save for my own demise, a bottle of Dr. Pepper. So it was that I, with perceived hours left to live, walked to the nearest supermarket and purchased the fizzy beverage, enjoying one last earthly comfort as I walked out the automatic doors. My plan would have easily transpired if not for a voice calling out to me as I walked across the parking lot. Hey man, how's it going? I turned to see a young man, only a few years older than myself, eyes sparkling with something I lacked, a smile sweeter than the drink in my hand, waved to me from an open SUV's trunk. As I prepared myself to give my remaining cash to another begging bum, at no point did the man ask for spare change, however, and when I gruffly told him that I wasn't well, that of course it was about lost love, he smiled widely and pathetically and told me he understood hardship. See, he and his beloved, a woman I now also noticed sitting in the expanded trunk as I walked over to the vehicle, were on their own, barely surviving, with said vehicle as their home. He asked for my name and gave me his, and with another radiant smile, relayed to me that he was as joyful as can be. After all, he had love, something that he valued above all else. And he had hope in the form of a factory job he had started earlier. Tommy told me that he was truly blessed, and with a gentle hand on my shoulder, reminded me that I was too, that I would find my dreams someday, that my journey would be fulfilled, that I'll get there. I was awestruck, empowered, if only enough, just enough even, but somehow more than enough. Fighting tears, I thanked him for his kindness when I needed it most, and offered him free food should he ever find himself at the restaurant I worked at, before we said our goodbyes. He never did come in for that meal, and she never said a word. But I know on that night, a night shrouded in shadow and circumstance, God sent two angels to a dim parking lot to save an inspired man who drove home safely, to live and to hope another day.
That's great.
Thank you.
That is
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
So that type of story, I'm hoping is going to give hope to others who listen to this. I mean, that's really what we're doing here with this podcast is giving hope to people during hard times and just when we're missing our loved ones and when things are crazy and uncertain, we need to know that there are beings that are compassionate and
Mhm.
compassion and love is all around. That's really it. Now you had
Absolutely.
another story too about your sister.
Yes, I do. And this story is there is no poem for this one. Although I probably should write about it at some point. Obviously, the events of it are well before I started writing. Seriously. Anyways, I suppose. But yeah, so a little bit of background, I suppose. My sister, who is actually the book is she's the one it's dedicated to. Actually, she passed in 2020. When we were kids, we used to go to a flea market all the time in the town I grew up in Florida. It was an awesome flea market. It was massive, and there were a lot of streets kind of running through it for like the parking lot and stuff. And it was pretty big. It probably wasn't as big as in real life. It's not open anymore, but when I
Sounds
was a
kind of
kid,
like
it's like,
a
oh, this is massive.
sounds kind of like a strip mall or an outlet mall or something.
No, it's kind of in its own thing. It had multiple, like, it was because there was open aired buildings, and so it looked kind of like, oh, I don't know how to describe it. It was all open aired, like there was no air conditioning with it,
Got
and
it.
so it was sort of like four. I think it was four like sub blocks,
Mhm.
um, and like kind of alleyways running through it, and
Mm.
then it had like four, like a cross section of actual road that cars drove. I'm describing it poorly, and it was probably a lot smaller than I remember in real life because everything's big when you're a kid. But was together all the time. We had met some cool people there actually. But when I was little, my sister was 3 years younger than me, and she was mentally handicapped. So she, throughout her life, probably had a mental capacity of she never really got past 2, 3. As far as cognition goes. When she was really little, she was in a stroller, and we were walking through the movie market, my family and I. At one point, she had gotten out, and we hadn't noticed for a minute. Couldn't have been more than a couple minutes. I suppose it could have been, but in the time in which we were in one of the stalls looking and looked back, she had just gotten out, and she did that a lot. She was relentless.
Sweetheart.
She was determined, I think, is the maybe the nice way to put that. She's willful, I suppose. She was strong-willed is the word I'm thinking of. So she was doing that even at a really young age. So she had gotten out. We didn't quite know where she was. Did she run into the street? Did she get abducted? She couldn't have been more than 3, maybe. So I had to have been 6, 7, something akin to that. And we were by one of the crossways where the roads were going through. There was a produce stand actually over there. I think that's actually the store we're at now that I'm thinking about it. And so we're kind of frantically around. My mother is obviously very distraught. But we turn around and walking from like where that main road was a man holding her hand, and I don't recall the age of the guy or what he looked like. It's very little. So I remember the sunlight kind of hitting him as he walked in. So in my mind, it's just like literally coming through a beam of light, but a bit of sunlight there, it's like through a child's eyes. But he did walk up, and he kind of walked up right to us and said, "I found Elizabeth," and said her name.
And
And we're like, "Oh my god!"
yeah,
Oh,
it
sorry.
doesn't sound like she could have told him her name.
No, she was nonverbal most of her life. I mean, much later in life, she had a couple of words she could say. She learned a couple of fun words later on in life, but for the most part, she was pretty nonverbal, and definitely with her own name. I don't know if she ever said her own name. Now that I'm thinking about it, so that
He
would have been a really weird thing. But in the time it took us for, because obviously the first reaction is like, "Thank you," but also, "Where have you been? We need to get you safe." Put her back in the stroller. In the time it took us, and obviously my parents who did it, but put her back in the stroller, actually, and turned around to like seriously thank the guy. The guy was gone. And so it was one of those, someone's watching out for the both of us, clearly. I should write that down one of these days. And I'm thinking about it.
do a poem about that too.
I
That would
should do a
be.
poem about that because that would be a really good one, actually.
You know
But
what strikes me? You told me about this, whatever, like weeks ago,
a
and I
couple
said,
weeks
"Oh
ago,
my
yeah.
gosh, I got to get you on the show." So you told me about this weeks ago, and I just now put together that she could not have told him her name.
Yeah, there was pretty much no way. One, I mean, even by neurotypical standards, she wasn't, but definitely by her, with her own disabilities, her own name would have been not something she would have said. So,
And it's not
um,
like Beth or Kate. It's
right.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
right?
Unless I'm totally misremembering it, and she had some kind of collar or bracelet, or not collar, that's weird, but like some identifying, like a backpack with her name on it or something like that. Or I know at one point in her life she had one of those bracelets that had the, like, in the case of emergency thing, but I think she got that later. I think
Hmm.
she got that when she started going to school and started being school age. So unless I'm totally misremembering, which is possible, of course, but
Even so, having this
yeah,
guy come up and drop off this little kid,
yeah,
and then in the time it took for you to get her strapped into the stroller,
she's
not
gone.
long.
Yeah.
Turn around,
No,
he's
not long at all. Yeah, it was like we waited 10 minutes or so. Like it was, most of it was someone just kind of dropping and running away, which that would have been really weird.
that would have been very
Um,
weird. In this
Very
open
weird.
air place.
Most people would just be like, "Of course, you're welcome," or like, "Don't worry about it," or like, "At least is she okay?" Like most people would have stayed behind to kind of triage that a little bit, but then the guy just kind of vanished. So, unless he's a super humble guy, just like, "I don't want anything, so I'm out of here." But there was definitely someone looking out for us that day, looking out for her that day.
It could have been very bad.
It could have been very bad, very very bad.
She could have gotten hit by a car. She could have gotten abducted. It could have
There's
gone.
a lot of ways that could have gone wrong.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And tell us again
Yes.
your book and your website, please.
Oh yes, my author name is James W.A. and my book is called Desolation and Epiphany. It is available on my website at thejameswa.com.
VJ.
You can also follow me on Instagram at thejameswa. One and only.
Wonderful. TheJamesWA.com. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, James, for telling your story. I really appreciate it.
So thank you for having me on here. I appreciate the opportunity to tell it.
Absolutely. Next up is Victor the Voice, who is a podcast host in his own right and who has some very interesting stories. Hello, Victor. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Christy. Nice to be here.
Great. You've had several encounters that were just amazing. Do you want to share with us?
Absolutely. I guess the first time that I have an actual recollection of was when I was about 6.5 years old. I was very close to my paternal grandfather, and I was sitting in my room one day and I was reading a book and I looked up and my grandfather was standing there. And I said, "Grandpa, where did you come in from?" And he didn't say a word. He just smiled. And then he sort of dissolved, disappeared. And I went into the living room, and my mother and father were there. And unbeknownst to me, my grandfather had actually been in the hospital. He didn't share that with the rest of the kids. And so I said, "Grandpa was just here." And they both looked at each other and then looked at me. And I had been a child who had been labeled with an overactive imagination because I would report things that I would see, and I was told basically, "It's your imagination, don't share it with anybody else." A couple of minutes later, the phone rang with word that my grandfather had passed away. So that was my first conscious experience of disembodied spirit.
Wow.
Had a lot of other things happen when I was a kid. I'll share one more story from childhood, and then we'll jump ahead a little bit. When I was in first grade, which would have been 1959, the teacher had a book on the shelf called "You Will Go to the Moon." And I asked the teacher if I could borrow the book, and she said yes. And 2 weeks later, she said, "You borrowed the book. You have to bring it back." I said, "I can't bring it back." And the teacher said, "Why?" And I said, "Because it's wrong." And she said, "What do you mean it's wrong? How do you know it's wrong?" I said, because I've been there. Without going into the details of the whole story, I had a lot of, they now call contact experiences, very pleasant experiences when I was a kid. Not what they call abduction, but pleasant experiences. And that was one of them, that they would take me into what I called night school, into this wonderful classroom, and teach me things that I had no other source of information for. So that was probably the other most remarkable thing that happened. A lot of the activity for me shut down in my late teens and really didn't resume until my 20s. And then in 1975, I was in the United States Air Force. And I was stationed in Seoul, Korea, and two remarkable things happened. I touched upon this when we spoke personally, but I always listened to the voice. The voice would deliver messages to me, and I believe it's an angelic voice. And the voice would deliver messages that were of great importance. So one morning, I was in Korea in 1975, 6,000 miles away from my mother in New York, and she and I would exchange monthly letters that we'd send back and forth, and I had no reason to think that anything was wrong. And the voice came to me one morning and said, "You've got to call your mother. She needs to hear from you." Now, they talk about the still, soft voice within. And that's the voice that I'm talking about. Some people say sometimes there's an ego voice which shouts at you. That's not the voice. That's not the voice of spirit or the voice of guidance. So the still soft voice said, "You got to call your mom," and 6,000 miles away in New York. And in those days, for those of us old enough to remember, we had what we called extension telephones, where you had wired telephones, and you could have a phone in one room and the same phone basically in another room, just wired on the same circuit. And I called, and my mother and my sister picked up the extension simultaneously. And I said, "Mom, is there anything wrong?" And my sister goes, "Oh my God, how did he find out?" And she said she was scheduled for major surgery the next day. And the voice told me to tell her that the operation would be a complete success. She'd have a rapid recovery. Everything would be just fine. She needed to hear those words from me, and consequently, that's exactly what happened. So that was one of those experiences that I'll always be grateful for, being able to comfort my mom at that time that she was prior to going into surgery. Also in Korea, later that year, 1975, I was having problems with my back. I had been in a football game, an Army Air Force intramural football game. It was supposed to be touch football, and I guess the Army guys were a little overzealous, and one of them tackled me with his head into the small of my back, and consequently did a little damage back there. In any event, the treatment from the base hospital was not very effective. And a friend of mine said, "Have you ever tried acupuncture?" Now, I'd heard of acupuncture, but I never experienced it. He says, "Try acupuncture. You'll find that it really helps you." So I made some inquiries. I found out about a local Korean acupuncturist off base, made an appointment, went to see him, had the treatment. And beautifully enough, the next day, the pain in my back was mostly gone, had subsided. What I did not know was that in those days, Korean acupuncturists did not use disposable needles. Their sterile techniques of sterilizing needles was not the greatest. And hepatitis B was endemic in Korea. Many people had the disease, carried it, but never actually manifested the illness. 2 weeks later, I woke up in the morning and I didn't feel right. And I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and my eyes were turning yellow. And I said, "Uh-oh, something's not right here." And I went to the base hospital again, and they looked at me and said, "You have hepatitis." They immediately admitted me, and they started treating me differently than they were treating other patients on the same hepatitis ward. They were giving me infusions of vitamin K and all kinds of other stuff. And the doctor came one morning and said, "Do you have a will prepared?" I said, "No, why do I need?" I was 22 years old. Really didn't have a family. I said, "Why do I need a will?" "Well, to protect your family, your loved ones at home. We'll have the judge advocate general send someone over and prepare a will for you." I said, "Okay." And then as the weeks ensued, a couple of weeks had gone by, and I was getting much weaker and much sicker. And one day the voice came and said, "Ask the doctor for a picture of something, a book or something, with a picture of a healthy liver." So I always listened to the voice. The doctor came by. I said, "Do you have anything that shows a healthy liver?" He said, "Why?" I said, "I just want to look at an image of a healthy liver." So he begrudgingly brought me an anatomy book, and it was open to a page where the liver was there. It was a healthy liver, and gave it to me, and he left the room, and I started studying the image of the healthy liver. Approximately 20 minutes, half an hour went by, and the voice came back and said, "Put the book down. Now place your palms over your abdomen." And I did. and I started feeling this amazingly beautiful tingling and warmth sensation. Just a loving sensation, very beautiful sensation. And at some point, perhaps a half hour later, I fell asleep. The next morning at 5 a.m., the nurse woke me up. She apologized. She said, "We have to take your blood." 2 hours later, she came back and said, "I'm sorry, the lab messed up your blood. We need to take another draw." An hour later, the doctor came in and said, "After I gave you that book last night, what did you do?" And I told him. He says, "You're crazy." I said, "Why?" He said, "Last night, your liver enzymes were so high that we didn't think you'd survive the night. This morning, they're practically normal, and we've never seen anything like that happen ever." Now, you would think that that would have been my wake up moment, my aha moment, and opening up to my healing path, but I wasn't ready until my late 30s to start following that through. But he actually wrote in my official medical records, "Luckiest SOB I've ever met in my life." That's probably the most remarkable story that I can share because of the events and the fact that I was near death, I guess you would say.
Yeah, you're now a Reiki master.
In my late 30s, a series of events happened. I started, funny enough, I had a problem with my back again. And a friend of mine said, "Have you ever tried taking yoga?" And I said, "No." And I found a local high school newspaper had an ad for adult education stuff. And it said, take yoga classes with Judy Hamsa. And something about the name Hamsa resonated with me. And I signed up for the class. I met Judy. She became my teacher and also a very dear friend. And early on, she said, "I love your voice. Would you start facilitating meditation?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I love doing it. And we started taking a series of retreats up to a Zen monastery in Livingston Manor, New York. And at one of those retreats, another friend mentioned the word Reiki, something that I had never consciously heard in this lifetime, but something that again resonated with me. These are part of also the synchronicities that I've experienced throughout my life, and I just to say that in advance of telling the story. So in any event, there were three of us, including my teacher, who said, "You know what? That's interesting, Reiki. Let's look into that next year." This was October of that year. 2 weeks later, we were in our first Reiki class together. And Reiki became the spiritual rocket fuel for me, the spiritual accelerant that reopened me to all of these wonderful things. In any event, the very first Reiki class, the teacher told us to place our palms over our hearts and to close our eyes and see if anything came into our field of vision, our closed eye field of vision. And as soon as we did, now I didn't have angel consciousness up to that point, not really angel consciousness. And I saw what I assumed to be was an angel. And the teacher said, "What do you see?" I said, "I see an angel." He said, "Ask the angel its name." And immediately I heard Gabriel. Without even asking, I heard Gabriel and planted a seed. That night I went home. My daughter was 13 at the time. She said, "Daddy, what's this Reiki stuff? Would you show me what it's about?" I said, "Of course." And she sat in a chair, and I placed my hand on the back of her head, and she closed her eyes. She said, "Daddy," she said, she started naming members of our family that had passed away. She saw her grandfather and other people who had passed away. And she said, "Daddy, there's an angel flying above our family." And I said, "What's the angel's name?" And she said, "Gabriel," which confirmed for me exactly the experience that I was having. And interesting thing about Gabriel is, as those who are familiar with the biblical Gabriel, Gabriel, some call Gabriella, some feminine attachment to it. I don't see angels as having gender, but we'll leave that for now. In any event, Gabriel was the communicator, the messenger. And it's interesting how the messenger came to me, and throughout my life, I have become a messenger for others. So I'm grateful for that connection and that opportunity. Did you
Yeah.
want to ask me something about that?
Yes, there's also a story of a dream you had of teaching.
Yes, yes.
That was amazing.
That actually happened earlier this year, a few weeks ago. And this was a dream. I've had lucid and vivid dreams most of my life. This one was like real life. It was so lucid, I thought it was actually taking place. And I awoke from it in tears, but I'll share the story. My dream was that I was attending an angel's academy. It was this beautiful temple, and we walked inside, and there were 18 chairs arranged around in a U formation. And we were instructed to go from table to table, make eye contact with the angel at each of these tables. When they nodded their head, we'd move on to the next until we completed the cycle of all the 18 tables. Then we were instructed to go to the main table and receive two things there: receive our angelic name and receive our angelic assignment. And the name that I was given was Aviel, which means God is my Father. And the assignment I was given was to be an angel to other angels. I woke up in tears. And the reason I woke up in tears is throughout my life, not even consciously doing this, is I would go out of my way to help other people who were also helpers, who might need someone to listen to, who might need some assistance in some way, who might need healing. And I'd been doing that my entire life. So they were basically confirming my mission.
That is so beautiful. And it reminds me of hypnosis session I conducted a few years ago, QHHT session where this woman was a guardian angel. She described the life of the child that she was watching over and how she helped. And then I wanted to know where she had trained. And so we went up to the school where she trained and she described all of the things that they were learning and doing. And it just sounds so familiar and so similar to what you had experienced there. Amazing stories. And then, of course, Gabriel, perfect angel for you and your family.
Absolutely. The messenger.
The messenger, the messenger. And which leads me to, I want to ask about your podcast. Can you tell us a bit about the podcast that you have out there?
Absolutely. So, talk about synchronicity. I'm an ordained interfaith minister, have been since the late 1990s. And I was co-officiating a wedding in New Jersey several years ago in 2016. And in the wedding party were the publisher and editor of Om Times Magazine and Om Times Media, all the publications and the radio and television and so on. And we were seated with them at the table after the wedding and started chatting. And they said, "We love your voice. Would you like to join us and do a podcast?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I had done some podcasting prior to that, but this was spiritual podcasting. This was more the Om Times theme and also different from what I had done. I had done paranormal podcasts before that, and I really had stopped doing that because I wasn't enjoying it and I was getting out of that field anyway. So I started doing my first show in 2016. The first show is entitled Destination Unlimited, which is the crossroads between science and spirituality. And I've loved doing that show. I've had some amazing guests: near death experiencer Eben Alexander, other near death experiencers, people who have had all types of experiences that, again, crossroads of science and spirituality. A lot of the quantum realm information, just amazing stuff. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that because it allowed me to be an angel to other angels. I was basically bringing them into the audience with messages that people, I believe, needed to hear. 2020 comes along and the advent of COVID. And I reached out to my friends at Home Times and I said, I think it's time for another show, a show about the challenges that people are facing right now with the advent of the pandemic and other life changes that were going on because of it. And so that launched a show called Vox Novus, which is the new voice in Latin. And that show was dedicated to lifestyle change, initially to pandemic lifestyle changes, things people had to do, and later on about careers and about the growth of the need for women in STEM, science, technology, mathematics, engineering, and anything and everything having to do with the way the world was changing and the things that people needed to do to be prepared for that change and also to participate in that change. And I'm grateful. I've done the first show, Destination Unlimited. I've done the show that actually you and I did together. It's 374th show. And then I have 170 approximately of the Vox Nova shows. These are all available after the initial airing from Om Times on the YouTube under Om Times Media, and again, Destination Unlimited and Vox Novus.
Right. And those can be found on your website, which is
That's
victorthevoice.com.
correct. There are links to them, victorthevoice.com. That was a label that somebody had given me years ago before I started the Om Times podcast, the paranormal podcast. The guy that I was doing the podcast with said, "You're the voice. You're Victor the Voice," which is funny because I don't know how many people remember, but when I was a kid, RCA Victor Company had a picture of a dog listening to a Victrola, and it said his master's voice. So that's kind of funny, Victor the Voice. But this voice I was given for healing, for leading meditation, for comforting people. And I am also a vice chair of the New York City chapter of the Edgar Cayce Society, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. I started that last year, being vice chair and on the board. And I also am now doing a series of weekly meditations on Tuesday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for ARE of New York. And they're free to attend. If someone would like to make a contribution to ARE of New York, that's wonderful. But they're free to attend. And I'm happy to share information about that if anyone wants to know more about that.
Is that information on your website?
It is not on my website yet.
So you've got a lot going on. This is amazing. I'm just so honored that you had time to sit down with little old me on this show and talk about your amazing experiences, because I think, we don't have to be a Reiki master, an interfaith minister, a meditation instructor to have these angel encounters. Anybody can have them. And this is open to all of us. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think,
May I share? May I share one more experience?
would you please? That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. And perhaps you can stick this in where the other one was. In 2020, my mother was in the last days of her life, and I went to visit her in the hospital, and I was holding her hand. And my dad had died when I was 15. And when he died, there was a song at the time by Bobby Goldsboro, a song called Honey. And the lyrics said, "And honey, I miss you, and I'm being good, and I'd long to be with you, if only I could." And I said, "Mom," she was unconscious. I was holding her hand. I said, "Mom, Daddy's waiting for you." And he's singing, "And honey, I miss you, and I'm being good, and I'd long to be with you, if only I could." And I knew at that point that this was the time that she was going to transition. And I started sending her love and compassion. My sister was there also. We're sending her love and compassion. I started seeing this vision of circles and rings. Circles and rings started appearing in my line of sight, my vision. And she transitioned. And a couple of weeks later, this poem came through me. I've been writing poetry since I was a kid. And the poem is entitled Circles and Rings, and I'll share that with you now.
Yeah, please, please, please.
The path of great beauty in so many things, from atoms to galaxies, circles and rings. Natural wisdom that dwells there within, from naught to 360, that magical spin. We circle each other in gravity's dance, as Gaia circles Sol, the solar romance, as Luna circles us in life-giving motion, drawing the tides and inner emotion. And the age of the oak is found in its rings, as in woman and man and all living things. And when the rings stop and life comes to an end, we'll all circle back and dance once again.
That's so beautiful. And it really captures that moment, doesn't it? I mean, the circle is eternal, rings are eternal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for sharing that. And then you've got a collection of poems that is out now? Is it
Yes, I published it last September. It's called Circles and Rings, a collection of poetry from the soul, and it's available on Amazon.
wonderful by Victor the Voice Furman? Thanks so much for joining me today. This has been a wonderful visit, and I appreciate your stories.
Christy, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to share with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and follow, and be sure to share this episode. The more people who know about this podcast, the more great story submissions we get. Have a story to share? Email your own real-life angel encounter to angelencounterspodcast@gmail.com or visit radiatewellnesscommunity.com/real-life angel encounters podcast. Or join our Facebook group and continue the discussion. Want to know what your angels and loved ones have to tell you? Schedule an appointment with me at radiatewellnesscommunity.com. A special thanks to James Wheeler for the original music and to Tiffany Baumgarten for the logo design.